I'm not sure why.
Oh, welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Thank you to those members of SUIHAA and friends who are joining online. And in particular, thank you to Dennis Schatz, who is based in Seattle as president of the SU International House Alumni Organization. And I'm going to hand over to Dennis to open the proceedings. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Greg. I can see it's raining there. We typically have a lot of rain here in Seattle, but we'd like to have some of your rain now. We've had almost 2 months worth of clear weather. Well, welcome everybody. Nice to see so many people there. Welcome to the 2025 Graeme de Graaff Lauris Elms Roundtable, which features our 4 distinguished panel members to discuss the important topic of student accommodations and the role of universities. Again, nice to see so many people in the event in person and many joining virtually. As Greg mentioned, I'm Dennis Schatz. I'm the president of the Sydney University International House Alumni Association, fondly known as SUIHAA, which is the association that represents over 6,000 people who lived at International House and is the sponsor of this roundtable. Before we start, I'd like to provide an acknowledgement of country. As people are joining the roundtable from locations around the world, I ask you consider the indigenous populations where you live. For me, I'm joining from Seattle in the United States. I live in the historic and contemporary lands and shores of the Duwamish, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other coastal Salish nations. I acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. I'm delighted to note that this is the first hybrid event sponsored by SUIHAA since the pandemic. Nice that so many people can join in person to hear this important discussion, to meet old acquaintances and make new friends, but at the same time allow for people elsewhere in the world to join in. Before I hand the mic over to the panel facilitator, Greg, I want to recognize the 2 people we honor with this roundtable. I'm gonna show a slide here to do that. Come on, there we go. The 2 people we honor are Graeme de Graaff and Lauris Elms. While they cannot join us this evening, I know they are looking forward to viewing the recording of the roundtable when it becomes available on the SUIHAA YouTube channel next week. Graeme was the inaugural director of International House from 1966 until he retired in 1987. Besides nurturing a place where international understanding grew and global friendships formed, and a few marriages, he was a personal mentor to many residents in the house, including myself. And while Lauris Elms, Graeme's wife and world-renowned opera singer, was not an official member of International House staff, she was an important support for Graeme and the residents in the house. She mentored many residents and embedded music as a regular feature of International House programming. We will never forget how her operatic voice added so much to our musical events in the house. The International House alumni who knew them thanked them for their many years of devotion and service and to the ideals of International House. Now let me introduce our facilitator of today's roundtable, Professor Greg Houseman, an alumnus of International House and the current chair of the International House Council, the university's International House Council, that provides advice concerning current redevelopment of the house, and a recent inductee to the prestigious British Royal Society for his work in geophysics. Thank you, Greg, for taking on this important responsibility of facilitating the discussion.
Thank you, Dennis, for the welcome to country and the background on the Degraaff-Elms Roundtable. which has been held biennially in honour of Graeme and Lauris, each time focusing on a societally important question. Again, I'd like to welcome the audience, some online, some in person here at Sydney University. As Dennis mentioned, I am the chair of the Sydney University International House Council. Although the International House has been closed for nearly 5 years, the university has committed to redevelop what was a much-loved university institution, and the council is working with the university toward that goal. Personally, I followed an international academic career in geophysics that led me from Sydney to Cambridge, Harvard, Canberra, Melbourne, Leeds, and now Beijing. I believe this gives me a broad perspective on what makes a university successful. Today, our focus is on student accommodation and the role of universities. And I'm delighted that today we have 4 distinguished guests here in front of us. I will introduce each one of them in turn. They can give us some special insights into issues that have actually come into the political foreground this year because of some really significant problems in the availability of affordable housing in Sydney. So the basic ground rules today are that I will introduce each of our 4 guests, who will each have then about 10 minutes to address the audience. Thereafter, I hope we can follow up with some roundtable discussion on some of the points that have been raised, and later introducing audience questions, aiming to finish by 7 p.m. Please be aware that the meeting is being recorded. And on that note, we're going to begin. We will hear first from Professor Alan Morris at the end of the table here, who is a research professor in the Institute for Public Policy and Governance at the University of Technology, Sydney. His most recent books are The Private Rental Sector in Australia, Living with Uncertainty, co-authored with Kath Hulse and Hal Pawson, Gentrification and Displacement, the Forced Relocation of Public Housing Tenants in Inner Sydney, and The Australian Dream, Housing Experiences of Older Australians. He is the lead chief investigator for an Australian Research Council discovery project focusing on eviction in the private rental sector, and an ARC linkage project examining the circumstances of applicants on the social housing waiting list and the impacts of waiting. So thank you, Alan. You're right with the switch on that microphone, or shall I?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Greg, and welcome everybody. So I'll have to talk quite quickly. So what I'm presenting today is part of an Australian Research Council grant looking at international students in the private rental sector in Sydney and Melbourne. The methodology involved a very sizable survey. So we had over 7,000 international students in the private rental sector, and we also did a number of interviews. So I just want to focus on one aspect. Okay, Josh, you want to change? So what we did was we looked at financial stress indicators. So these are financial stress indicators from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. And we divided the students in terms of how many financial stress indicators they suffer from. So these are some of the financial stress indicators. The second column, we did a second survey during COVID. Let's not worry about that. It's just too much data. Let's just worry about the first column. So as you can see, around about 20% of students were really struggling. For example, could not afford to buy prescribed textbooks, went without meals, 21%. So that's 1 in 5. Had trouble paying electricity, 11%, etc. Asked welfare. Well, that's not too bad. Had to borrow money from friends or family, 41%. So, okay, let's proceed. Thanks. So what you have, yeah, it's not terribly complex. The red is the COVID survey. Let's not worry about that. As you can see, the COVID survey is much, we did 2 surveys, one December 2019 before COVID, and then we surveyed the same group of students in July 2020 once the pandemic had struck. Anyway, so the blue is before COVID. So 44% of international students had no financial stress indicators. So what you can surmise from that, they came from comfortable middle-class homes and they could afford their accommodation, etc. 31% had 1 or 2 financial stress indicators, so they were struggling a bit. 20% had 3 to 5 financial stress indicators, so these students were in trouble. And then 5% were extremely precarious. They had 6 to 8 financial stress indicators, so they were in crisis. Okay. So we had this long survey, a range of questions, and I'll just go through a few of them. So this is, I find myself often worrying about paying the rent each week. So as you can see, the extremely precarious students, around about 80%, said that they were extremely, they found themselves worrying. They agreed or strongly agreed that they worried about paying the rent each week. The highly precarious, around about 2/3, the moderately precarious, around 1/3, and then the secure, even the secure students, around 16% agreed or strongly agreed that they struggled to pay the rent. They were worried about paying the rent each week. Okay. So there are a couple of quotes. It was really difficult, like day and night. I used to wonder whether I'll be able to find a job or not, because it was getting harder and harder to like get money from back home. It was really difficult, and it's a huge difference of the money, like with the exchange rate as well. So a lot of students who come from fairly middle-class homes in a country like Nepal, for example, they come to Australia and the exchange rate is very weak, and they find themselves really battling. And if they can't find work, obviously, you know, a lot of students have to work. It's an enormous battle. This concern also impacts on academic study. It has a lot of unintended consequences. The second quote, I think the rent was the heaviest one in my studies. So apart from the mental conditions, apart from the mental condition, I would have done a lot better than I've done in uni if it wasn't for the rent. So a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Okay, let's move on. Quite often I go without necessities like food, so I can pay for my accommodation. As you can see again, around about 70% of the extremely precarious agreed or strongly agreed, around about 40% of the highly precarious agreed or strongly agreed, and around 16% of the moderate. So, you know, students going without food because of the whole rental situation. Okay, next slide. So there's a quote. It's just like you have this thing in your mind that you have to pay somebody back. You have to save up for the rent and your fees. So we have seen the days where day, and that actually also affected you physically, not eating the whole day and relying on one meal and just water and water. Okay, thank you. So a lot of students have to work. So as you can see, in terms of the extremely precarious, around about 87%, so they have to work in order to pay the rent. The highly precarious, around 2/3, 67%, and the moderately precarious, around half, 50%. So this becomes very, very crucial. Okay, next slide. So very often what happens is that students find themselves in highly exploitative situations. They don't know their rights. They're easily exploited. Very often quite often it's co-national exploitation. And they have to maintain this job, even however terrible it is, because if they lose the job, they won't be able to pay their rent. It was a terrible job, as I still had to stick to it because of the rent I needed to pay. If it was difficult, I could barely work or study, but I had to consistently worry about my rent, had to consistently worry about the next week I had to pay. It was terrible, etc. Okay, I think I better move on. Thanks very much. So to save on rent, do you share your bedroom? Sorry, there's misprint there. Your bedroom with someone who isn't your partner. So this is a situation which a lot of students have to bear, a lack of privacy. They have to share with people they don't know, share their bedroom with people they don't know. So 43% of the extremely precarious, 32% of the highly precarious, 25% of the moderately precarious, and even 20% of the secure students said they have to share their bedroom with somebody that's not their partner. And that can create a lot of problems. It can work, obviously, if you get on with a person, but it can also be extremely stressful. No privacy, etc. Okay, next slide. So this is a PhD student. She was at UTS. I moved from a hostel to an apartment, but the apartment is the same, like not really much better than a hostel in some sort of way. But we still have 4 people in a room and 2 bunk beds. That's the rental situation in Sydney. Yes, there was another room for men, and some people also lived in the living room. So in the living room, they put about 3 bunk beds, etc. 6 people live in the living room, and the other room, I don't know, because that's a male domain, and I can't get into that room. So 13 or 14 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. In the last year, have you ever felt you could become homeless? This is really quite a shocking stat. 70% of the extremely precarious, 35% of the highly precarious, and 13% of the moderate precarious felt they could become homeless in the next while. So that's really quite disturbing. Okay, next slide. So there we go. 10 minutes. Conclusions. Right, housing of international students is highly differentiated. So clearly, I mean, I think, there's this tendency to see international students as a homogenous group. They're very highly differentiated. Some come from comfortable homes, some come from average homes, some come from homes which are not very affluent, and they really battle. But for a large proportion of international students, the rent is crushing. It's their most significant expense besides tuition fees. So what often happens is that the parents or the family will pay the tuition fees, and the child will say, well, I'll work and I'll pay the rent. Then they come to Australia, they come to Sydney or Melbourne, they find themselves really battling. Bottom 5%, extremely vulnerable situation. Another 20% are really struggling. Employment is absolutely essential for many students. Around 43% of students said they have to work. And although this survey is quite old, it was done in December 2019, what I would argue is that the situation has actually worsened quite considerably, because if you look at the rental market, vacancy rates are around about 1.3%. Medium rent in Sydney, December 2019 was $525 for a house, $510 for a unit. March 2025, $775 for a house and $710 for a unit. So, the situation, I would argue, has got a lot worse. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Alan, for this rather depressing survey. And I guess, yeah, I mean, it's worse than I had understood, and I believe that things need to be done about it. I hope that we will move back onto this subject in the course of the other discussions. But to continue, I'll introduce Deborah Seifert. Deborah Seifert AM, who is currently in her 11th year as the head of International House at Melbourne University. Dr. Seifert's leadership positions have also included the head of Fintona Girls' School, CEO of Philanthropy Australia, and head of University College, affiliated with the University of Melbourne. Dr. Seifert has experience as a director on a number of not-for-profit boards, including currently serving on the Council of Presbyterian Ladies College, Melbourne. Dr. Seifert is an experienced accreditation team chair with the Council of International Schools, undertaking visits for more than 25 years in countries including Cambodia, China, Italy, Japan, Laos, Qatar, South Korea, Thailand, and Vietnam. Thank you, Deborah, the chair.
Thank you. And I'm delighted to be part of the 2025 Degraaff-Elms Roundtable Forum. I begin by acknowledging the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand. I pay my respect to those who have cared and continue to care for country. Thank you to Dennis Schatz as President of SUIHAA for inviting me to participate today. You all may know that Dennis has a byline at the end of his email which says, "Work hard to find something that fascinates you. When you find it, you will know your life work." That's a quote from Richard Feynman, and it's such an important message in philosophy, so you see it every time Dennis sends you an email. I also thank Professor Greg Houseman, Chair of the IH Sydney Council. So you have Greg to thank from our pre-event discussion that I'm not going to dwell on federal government policy, incoming legislation, housing issues, potential regulatory changes, or private sector investment in property for university accommodation. All these things are important, but in this address, I will concentrate on the questions: why have an international house? What can it contribute to a university? What are the responsibilities to a student for their university experience as a whole? What are the evolving needs of a university student? Is a student's university experience enhanced by living at an international house? The first and incredibly relevant answer to these questions came from Graeme de Graaff more than 60 years ago. Graeme de Graaff, as we have heard, is such a valuable person in the international house philosophy and diaspora. He is the pillar in the history and development of IH Sydney, and I acknowledge Graeme for his work from 1965, when he was appointed to build and run IH Sydney, then leading and guiding the development of IH Sydney through to 1987. After this, Graeme's ongoing input and support for the philosophy of IH would continue. Lauris Elms has clearly been a wonderful partner for Graeme and a great supporter of IH. I loved reading Lauris's biography of Graeme on the University of Sydney website. Lauris says in part, and I quote, "Graeme's vision of fostering peace and understanding between people of many nations and cultures has led to the formation of some great and enduring friendships, many of them spanning oceans and national borders," if I may add also in this room. Graeme retired as a director of International House in 1987 and took up a position in community aid abroad, now Oxfam. His idealism, integrity, and courage have always been paramount. His interest in the world we inhabit and the people who live in it has never diminished. His sense of humour has made him the wonderful man that he is. End of quote from Lauris. I might add, as a director of a college, one does need a sense of humour to keep things in perspective. So, International Houses Worldwide is a global network of residential colleges with programs dedicated to fostering intercultural understanding and exchange. The organisation was inspired by the initial International House, founded in 1924 in New York City by Harry Edmonds. The IH mission was and still is to create communities where students and scholars from diverse backgrounds can live and learn together, promoting mutual respect and international friendship. Harry Edmonds was an official with the YMCA who in 1909 had a chance encounter with a lone graduate student from China. Harry recounts, "One frosty morning, I was going up the steps of the Columbia University Law Library when I met a Chinese student coming down. I said, 'Good morning.' As I passed on, I noticed he stopped. I went back. He said, 'Thank you for speaking to me. I have been in New York 3 weeks, and you are the first person who's spoken to me.' So Harry decided something must be done about this. Isolation, loneliness, and hence the IH movement was begun. A number of international houses in the USA were established through the philanthropy of John D. Rockefeller Jr. and the Rockefeller family through Harry's vision. These first international houses were established to bring together students from around the world to share experiences and life lessons. There are now international houses in the UK, Europe, Asia, and Australia, as well as North America. So why continue to have students living in an international house when the concept is more than a century old? Well, some traditions and values in life are worth continuing. International houses provide students of different nationalities and diverse cultures with the opportunity to live and learn together in a community of mutual respect, understanding, and international friendship. However, we ask the question, How is a student's university life enhanced by living at an international house? International houses seek to provide an environment to encourage the development of competencies in global perspective for living and learning. International houses seek to promote international understanding by providing a vibrant, interacting, international community of student scholars shared in a living experience. International houses seek to provide focus on the overall impact on whole communities, where there is sharing of the values associated with global citizenship and intercultural learning reflected in the learning for life and future actions. International houses seek to welcome difference and diversity. International houses seek to encourage curiosity. And international houses seek to overcome isolation and exclusion. So how do these philosophies sit with the University of Sydney policies? The University of Sydney promotes respectful engagement in learning and working environments, encouraging positive interactions and discouraging behaviours that undermine the dignity of individuals. The University of Sydney lists one of the graduate characteristics as cultural competence, stated as the ability to actively, ethically, respectfully, and successfully engage across and between cultures. Another graduate characteristic of Sydney University is listed as ability to influence, being able to engage others in a process, idea, or vision. An international house environment can assist in the development of respectful interactions and the graduate qualities of cultural competence and the ability to engage others in a process, idea, or vision, and these are clearly developed within an international house. Professor Michael Wesley is an expert in international affairs with extensive experience in international strategy. Professor Michael Wesley gave the oration at International House just last month, and I just wanted to talk to you about that briefly, because Professor Wesley said in his oration that within a university environment, respectful disagreement should be both permitted and actively fostered. He expressed deep concern regarding the trend of conducting debates as competitions, which shifts the primary focus away from understanding and intellectual discussion towards securing a win. He says that an ideal debate should be an intellectual exchange where everybody involves and stands to benefit equally. Each individual contributes perspectives and insights towards mutual growth and collective understanding. He says that such an approach would substantially elevate the intellectual quality of student discussions and deepen their critical engagement. So Professor Wesley's advocacy for learning to respectfully disagree aligns not only with the University of Sydney's graduate characteristic of ability to influence and engage in discussion, but also with the philosophy of an international house. Students from many cultural backgrounds can meet, interact, and learn from each other in a safe environment at international houses. Informal discussions are an integral part of the learning, particularly in the dining room, which I see as the village square. At International House Melbourne, the 350 people in residence span ages and stages of learning and across a range of disciplines. IH Melbourne has 20% postgraduate students, 30% Australians, 70% internationals from 40 different countries and regions. First-year undergraduates through to students undertaking master's degrees, professional doctorates and PhDs sit and discuss issues of the day over meals and in common shared spaces, and do so respectfully. How better to prepare a university student for their life ahead than to reside in an international house? The learning about others helps students learn about themselves. The world ahead will be working, living, and interacting across many cultures and ways of doing. Respect, understanding, curiosity, and positivity towards global citizenship is vital for the students of today to learn in order to be effective in the world of tomorrow. International houses are, I believe, a microcosm encapsulating the characteristics hoped for across a whole university. May the international house movement and provision long continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for those insights into the international house philosophy and its practicality. Maybe we'll hear more about this in the discussion later. We will now hear from Mr. Weihong Liang, who has an MA in Political Science and Government and is currently a PhD student in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Sydney University. Weihong has an extensive record of service with the Sydney University Postgraduate Representative Association, known as SUPRA, serving as president of SUPRA in 2022 to 24, and since 24 as education officer. He is also currently postgraduate fellow of the Sydney University Senate, is chair of the New South Wales International Student Representative Committee, and is international student officer with CAPA, the Council of Australian Postgraduate Associations. Uniquely here, he is closest to the coalface when it comes to talking about the international student experience. So thank you, Weihong.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. But today I probably share some of my personal story on the housing, and for some of the information, it's the first time I will share for the public. Actually, 14 years ago, when I checked into my university accommodation as a first-year student in China, I moved into a building constructed at 1950s. It's a quite old building, and with 6 people share in 1 bedroom, and 10 rooms share 1 toilet. And if you want to go shower, you should go out of this building and take a bicycle in 5 minutes and go to a shared bathroom. Then at the winter, after you're showering, back to your accommodation, you're probably already freezing your hair. That's my accommodation in China. But I still remember my roommate is come from a small town. And when they check in your room the first day, they bring a really big and large practiced bag, and they never even have a box. And for most of us stay in that accommodation for at least 4 years. And then if you do postgraduate study or PhD, you probably stay at that room in 10 years in total. But that's not really looks like a bad news, because if you know the price, you will be surprised. I just checked that. I will make wrong the information, but this year in Shanghai, a big city equivalent in Sydney, at the center of the city, you only need to pay $500 Australian dollar a year to get that bedroom for a bed in a share room. And when I studied in 14 years ago, it's 6 share, but today, because the growth for Chinese economy, most of those buildings be restructured. And currently it's 4 share with 1 bathroom. It's improved really fast, and we're continuing the improvement. In some Shanghai University, they probably already have 2 shares currently with air condition. So when I first came to Australia in 2016, I was shocked to discover at here, accommodation is university accommodation. You should wait for a long time. So why you ask me if I have the experience to live in a international house, that's no, because I never get that opportunity to live here. In my first 6 months here, I actually live at a 1-bedroom apartment in Broadway. And in the bedroom, they have 2 single beds, sleep 2 girls, and another male student and me live at the living room for another single bed. So that actually is 4 single beds in 1 apartment, share 1 bathroom. It's really equivalent to the situation when I live in China, but I should pay $700 for the whole room. So we 4 people share the bill, $700 a week, and unsafety, uncertainty. So after that, I moved to Ashfield and then to Marsfield, and now currently I live at Epping with my partner, rent, move, and located. So currently I become an expert. I can set up in an empty apartment in 1 or 2 days. I know what we can buy, and to I'm unbling for the furniture, become the expert on that. And actually, most of the international students here, after they study 1 or 2 years, because I'm expert on that. Another hobby bring to me, I study here, is I never have any extra items. I can bring all of my package in 2 boxes. Otherwise, how can I move if the landlord asks me to move to other place? It's really hard. So when I see that, I realized, particularly when I work for the student rep, that I know there's only probably 5% of university students have chance to live in the campus. I can realize that the university and many other around the world, including China, those universities actually carry a really heavy responsibility to make 95% of the students can live at the campus in an affordable rate. They actually lose lots of money and funding to do that. And a significant of the space for the campus is to build accommodation. But actually the student can enjoy the campus life. They can, as an example, as my roommate, they're really poor, not really have money, but they can enjoy the library to the late night. They can use the gym at the campus, swimming at the campus, use the student at the campus, running every day. I still remember. He actually done the undergraduate in Tianjin, then moved to Beijing to postgraduate, and currently became a public officer in Beijing. And one of my classmates from Tibet fly to China, fly to Tianjin, then live at the room. So I can imagine if we not really have that facility, those people probably can only get a high degree, a high school degree. They cannot have any chance to study in a major city. So because of this, I actually think about why Australia University always put our students go to the market rather than try to accommodate at the campus. And that's actually accessibility issues for our education system here. From that angle, the saddest thing is most or many local students do not really know. Not every country have to push their students live outside. Do not really know that situation. I took with my student colleague here from the local high school. Do not really know they have the chance to live at the campus if they study in China. Although that's a much wealthy country compared to my hometown. So many students may spend up 30% of their time just management their life in arrangement. They're unable to focus on study if they face tendency dispute. Particularly for the international student, they cannot make their room empty at the holiday, so they have to finish the tendency before the final exam period. But if something happens at the same time, they will burn out. So many of them choose to lose the bond, just told the landlord, okay, we will leave at that day. You keep my bond, let me go, and keep the peace at the final exam period. So it's really easy to lose several thousand bond at the end of the semester. And many of them never have the chance to use the university gym because they should travel 1 hour every day. Then they hurry to take the late bus, go home. So, and even for the Sydney, actually, it's considering as special. When I have the chance to meet the Tasmania University Union, they told me that also a housing issues around Hobart. I'm not sure why there's lots of land around Hobart, but the Tasmania University still only have 10% of students live at the campus. So that's not a big university or big city issues, that's the whole issues for the whole country. They actually lose the chance in past probably several decades. When the new students come here, pay the high tuition fee, they get income but not really use the income to build their own shared accommodation system, then lead the current problem. And that lead another big unfair that actually all of us pay tuition fee and staff fee. And so you should pay that to study here. But actually only the people have money, they can enjoy that service built for the facility at the campus. So for the people not really have money, they have to live far from here, then lead another equity here. So I talk about the whole international student green money revenue here. We also want to ask if the university and most of the university build their accommodation, take that responsibility, what will happen? Are they still can earn money from the student, or due to currently situation, it's actually will cost too much and cannot be achieved? No one really know the answer. So friend of my friend always know Weihong really push the accommodation and food at the campus. It's not really fancy. Why I do that is just because I believe if food and accommodation is uncertainty, we talk about the education experience is a really luxury topic, and this cannot really make sense that when you're a student just in a hurry and make to leave the campus in further, how they can focus on their study. It's really hard. So I can see a clear absent for the government responsibly here, but the university should take an important role. I would like to ask or suggest probably we should set up an ambition target here. It's not about how many beds we should build, 2,000, 3,000, we talk about that. We should have a universal or set up, for example, like America and China, the first year guarantee policy, something like that, to make sure the people in the first year for undergraduate or first semester for postgraduate, if they want, can have a chance to live at the campus at an affordable room. Then we know that is our target, that's our goal. And if to achieve that goal, what we should do. I'm really proud of the international house story. But today, it's really changed to compare that day. Nearly all of the students from overseas can live here. So today, if we just focus on 300, 400, 500 beds, it's not today's situation. The needs is really much for that. So we should set up a targeting ambition goal for the university, then try to achieve that year by year. Probably 10 years later, we will have that to make sure 30 to 40% of students can access the campus life, rather than they should live to the community around or far beyond. That my willing, and we try to push that with our colleagues, I see the SRC people here and super people here, that we should do the lobby, but I'm not sure what will happen. But good news that I see the government change the policy, try to link the student number with the accommodation. That's a chance. Yeah, I leave that to our leadership here. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Weihong. I think there's some really interesting points to pursue there, and it's great to learn your experience of the Chinese university. And you know, I'm spending 3 months a year in the China University of Geosciences in Beijing, and I very much bear out what you say. All the students are expected to be on campus, and while they do not have a luxurious life, they seem to enjoy the place. They are well fed. They do not have to travel. They have good facilities in general outside of their accommodation. But to move on to our final guest speaker, who is Nicole Gower. Nicole is a highly accomplished senior executive with a proven track record in leading successful organizational transformation and building high-performance teams. She brings deep expertise in corporate services, people and culture, change management, digital technologies, and enterprise leadership. Nicole currently serves as Vice President Operations at the University of Sydney. In her role, Nicole leads a broad and diverse portfolio of corporate service functions and is a key member of the university executive. Her industry experience spans higher education, health, professional services, and superannuation. She also holds several non-executive director roles, including Deputy Chair of one of Australia's largest and most awarded superannuation funds. Nicole holds a BA LLB Honours from the University of Technology, Sydney, is an accredited mediator and a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. She is also a graduate of Harvard's esteemed Advanced Management Program and remains an active member of the Harvard alumni community. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you, Greg. Well, good evening all, and on behalf of the university, welcome to the University of Sydney. It's great to see you here this evening. And can I please add my own acknowledgement of the traditional owners of land. Here we're on the land of the Gadi people, And can I please pay my respect to the Gadigal and acknowledge that we meet tonight on the university's year of 175th year anniversary. The Gadi people have been here for many thousands of years, connecting, learning, teaching, and I pay my respect to them in welcoming you tonight. So look, there's much to talk about tonight, and I'm conscious that I'm here representing the university as one of the executives responsible for student accommodation. Thank you for the introduction. My kind of shorthand version is I've been in the university sector for about 20 years, only here at the University of Sydney for about a year. And then I've also worked at Macquarie University for about a decade and UNSW for many years before that. And in all of those roles, I have been involved in student accommodation. Not always actually as part of my role's remit, but it's because it's something that I care about quite deeply. And look, perhaps I start with a sort of short personal story, which is just to share, we talked a lot about my kind of work life, but as Greg said, I also recently have been a student, an international student at Harvard, where I lived in student accommodation. And Deborah, to your point, so as part of that model, you have a living group that you live with and study with. And in my group, I had a Saudi, a Russian, a Brazilian, a Korean, a German, an American, and me as an Australian. And the bonds and connections that were formed through living and studying together. Actually, I was just texting my American colleague earlier today. We have all stayed deeply connected. It was a fundamental part of the experience. So I start with, please know I'm a strong advocate for student accommodation and the importance of students connecting and having a holistic experience. And in fact, Weihong and I, we work together on a range of things. I hear your challenge on setting a target. Just to kind of share, so Weihong set me another challenge earlier this year. He mentioned affordable food. So I think it was March. You said to me, Nicole, there's not enough affordable food on campus. And this semester together, we have jointly delivered a $5 food option. Yeah, so I do hear your challenges and we work together on them. So I take up that challenge and it's something that I sort of care about. But look, let me perhaps provide a few perspectives on behalf of the university. Some might touch on some of those topics that were the more boring topics that Deborah said she's not going to talk about, but I think it's worth just rounding out. And I won't repeat many of the comments that have been made, but I do think there are some really common challenges that we're facing. Affordability, clearly, I think is key. And as I look not just here at the University of Sydney, but also at those experiences at Macquarie, at UNSW, elsewhere, one of the dynamics that certainly has impacted, I think, on affordability is the blend of what's sometimes called, PBSA or purpose-built student accommodation commercially, and what universities offer through a range of models, through college models, through residential halls, through arrangements like International House. For a while there, I think we saw a lot of commercial offerings coming through in student accommodation. And not surprisingly, I think that has really put a lot of pressure on affordability. The fundamental premise of those models is that they are designed commercially to generate revenue, and that's inherently in the model. That's not why the university creates student accommodation. It needs to kind of work in terms of being viable, but it's not a kind of commercial imperative. And so I do think as we think about availability, affordability, there are some quite differential models between some of the commercially run and what universities can own and operate themselves. Not without complexity for universities to own and operate, I acknowledge that. But certainly I still see real benefit in university owned and operated. We are working with government to try and improve the settings to make that more viable. So one of the things that we do is offer a more affordable student accommodation at less than market rates. I think one of the things that we would like to see the government do to meet us there is to actually create some settings that are more akin to affordable housing for us to build and develop those kind of offerings, you know, rather than seeing us as a commercial provider when actually that's not really the model that we're setting up. So one of the things that we are doing is working with government to try and improve the settings in order to be able to build and develop more student accommodation. Wellbeing, I think, is a critical factor, and we've talked about this, which is more, you know, affordability, an important component, not only about affordability. And I sat down with some students earlier this week to hear their experience, a combination of domestic, international students, students living on campus, students who are day students coming from local areas. And look, one of the things I took away from spending time with them was the importance of connection and the difficulty that remains around making friends when you come to university. That remains a real challenge. And so I'm taken by that story about the student who said, 3 weeks and no one said hello. For many students, and one of the students there was a first-year student, not easy to come, make friends, join groups. So look, I do think the role that colleges, residential halls can play in assisting in that is worth acknowledging as well. I do want to acknowledge and comment briefly on some of the politics around this, which I think has been a challenge over recent years with both sides of the government. Really, I think having a focus on housing affordability, which I understand, I think that's clearly an important issue for the country. I think the challenge and the unfortunate element of that was the inclusion of international students as part of that dynamic. And I think that that is something which I think many universities have actively challenged, and seeing, in fact, international students as a great contributor to the economy and, not a drain on affordable housing at all, actually. So, and when you look at the data on that, it's actually very strong to say that's not a component of the affordable housing challenge for Australians more broadly. However, and I think Australia is an outlier here, when you look across the world at ratios of student accommodation beds to students, I do think Australia lags behind. So I think the average here is 1 to 15 student accommodation beds for students, whereas in countries like the UK, that might be 1 to 2. Now, acknowledging very different models in America, in the UK, students travel to study rather than being day students. There are some differences in the core system here. I do think there's a lot of work to do. Interestingly, the University of Sydney has a slightly better ratio than the average, but nonetheless, we recognise significant work to do. And then I think linking back, Deborah talked a little bit about the link between strategy, our purpose, and student accommodation. We too see those links. Really here, our core purpose, and I talk about this all the time. I run a big operations portfolio. But what I know, and I say to my teams, one of whom's here tonight, there are really 2 things the university does. We educate and provide, I hope, a transformative experience for our students, and we solve the world's problems through our research. I don't do either of those things. So my role here is one of service to that core mission. Great student accommodation, which is something that my portfolio can contribute, is a key enabler of, I think, a transformative student experience. So I think crucially important, not without challenges in terms of, you might then say to me, and we'll go to questions in a moment, and let me say, and I said to Greg, I welcome questions, even those challenging questions. I think there is a live debate to be had here. I acknowledge there are challenges. It's not as though I can immediately overnight produce thousands of beds. What we are working through at the university level, and we'll come back to Senate, which you'll see in November, is a student accommodation strategy about what is the right level of ambition, what are the different models, how might we get there, how does that fit into the broader university strategy, our broader resources that are available. Like anything, as you might imagine, to do one thing, there's lots of trade-off decisions to be made. So that's a place where we actively have those discussions. That work is live at the moment and comes through to Senate in November. But of course, there will be elements of complexity and nuance there around how we manage that, what are the right models. And maybe just the final thing I would say before we open up to questions you might be interested. So over the past 10 years, we have built about 1,700 new student accommodation beds on this campus in different formats. Two of those really stand out to me as interesting as we see the convergence of these issues around affordability, experience, what students are wanting and needing. And that is actually some of our most popular options that we offer students that have been built during that time are more akin to a university residential hall. So rather than the apartments with, you know, my own kind of bathroom and kitchen and, you know, apartment style living, actually the more dormitory style where you might have a bedroom shared, bathroom facilities, shared and communal kitchen facilities, shared kind of connection spaces, that has proven to be a really popular model. I think in part due to affordability. There is no doubt it's a much more affordable option than those where you have your own facilities, but also I think because of connection and, you know, being part of a community, the opportunities that brings, you know, when you're in the communal kitchen working together to cook your dinner. And so I see, again, some connections there with the international house model and how that can work as well. So look, perhaps with those opening comments, I'm really happy to hand over and take any questions that you might have, as I'm sure my colleagues on the panel would also do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We've got another microphone here, which we're going to share between the two tables so that each table has got a painted one. It's not so convenient to use that one. Right. Well, we've heard from the four speakers, you know, some really, I would say, interesting and important observations and comments, and from quite different perspectives. So in order to you know, try and encourage something of a discussion amongst the panel members initially, and then we'll take some questions from audience members and from the online community as well. I guess maybe I could just follow up with a question, you know, and leading on from Nicole's last observation. Have we pitched the quality of the accommodation at too high a level? You know, when I went to International House in the 1970s, it was very basic, but I was actually willing to share a room with somebody I didn't know in order that I could be there. And it wasn't a big deal. It never struck me as a huge hardship or anything. And of course, we didn't have private, the whole building did not have private bathrooms. But now when there was even discussion of actually whether it should be refurbished or how it should be refurbished, the idea came forward again. Oh, people these days want their personal bathroom, etc. I think, you know, have we just gone over the top on this instead of actually being realistic about where the market is and what the market actually needs in order to cater for the students?
Would you like
Yes.
to start?
Yeah.
Look, I'm happy to start there. I mean, I think the experience that we've had with these two dormitory style buildings, there's some alignment with those observations, Greg. So, and both of them I have been through. So dormitory style, fairly small rooms with a kind of bed, a desk, a wardrobe, don't always have air conditioning. So that's one of the sort of factors that is an impact on price. Do have heating. The bathroom facilities are very nice, but they're shared. And so that's an element that can, that I think can improve affordability. And the observation I would make is there's a very significant difference in price point. So, you know, looking at kind of $400 to kind of $550 a week, as opposed to some of those more unit style, in this part of Sydney, some of that goes up to, including, you know, with the commercial providers, you know, close to $1,000 a week. So almost half the price. It is quite a different offering, I think, in terms of affordability and experience. But I think those examples, you know, Greg would say, yes, there is something to that observation. And as we think about options for future accommodation, I mean, part of the things I think we must do is be evidence-led about what do students want, what is important to them, how do we know? Because the other observation I would make is, you know, it does change over time, and listening to what students want and need, I think, is fundamentally important. Do others want to chime in on this question?
That actually is the story I shared the first when I studied in China. It's the quality of the accommodation definitely is the more the better. But if we not really have any bad, we probably should at least have an option. And the university may set different option with different price. It's really nice. If you want to get twin share or triple share or a single room, the different price, give that option to student. Student can make their decision. Yeah.
It's interesting that the International House at the University of Chicago a few years ago, within the last decade, constructed a new wing, and they actually chose to construct it with a shared bathroom in each corridor as a way of people mixing together. However, my observation is in the southern states in Australia with the international students and their country of origin, many of the international students are wanting their own ensuite bathroom. And so older facilities with shared bathrooms in corridors may not be something that they're seeking. And then they're balancing community, friendship, lack of isolation, sharing of ideas with not having their own bathroom. And these two things become very material to an international student coming in. So I'm observing that because there is a choice of ensuite bathroom at newer facilities at Melbourne University. We have some ensuite and some share bathrooms. I would like to comment on share bedrooms, however. And if I could use an anecdote, when I first started as head of University College at the University of Melbourne, we would and would still see students who hadn't done so well at the end of each semester to ask, what can we help you with? You know, the first thing is, you got into the University of Melbourne, what is going on? You know, to have got into the university, you know that they are capable. And students who don't do so well, and I kept seeing them asking about it. And then I realised, looking statistically, after about 3 semesters, the majority of students that I was seeing about not doing so well were in share bedrooms. And at University College, when I went as head, I inherited about 8 bedrooms that were share bedrooms, two students in them, and the rest were single bedrooms. And I started thinking, what is going on with the behaviour of these students? And what was going on was that they had their own social life and then the pressure of their roommate's social life. And the difficulty clearly was the ability, or not so well, to actually choose whether they were going to follow their own social life and that of their roommate. It sounds trivial, it's not. And I could statistically see that there was an effect of students sharing a bedroom compared to the students who were not. And so if I was in the present position of actually looking at designing new accommodation, I would be looking at students having their own bedroom, having their own private space where they can then move out and about into their community, but have their own private space. And I think it's very important they can make their own decisions. As far as the bathrooms, in southern states of Australia, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, my observation is that the countries of origins of the students who are coming in may lead them to wish to have their own private bathroom. It could be cultural. I can't give a reason. Research would need to be done. But I do think if we were designing from scratch, I would be looking at ensuite bathrooms. The other comment I would make, which I think is extremely significant, is that the University of Melbourne has gone into some PBSA accommodation. The University of Sydney hasn't. I would commend the university for continuing down the path of looking at completely controlling the accommodation. My observation of PBSA accommodation is that there's a 40-year contract with various providers. It's not just the investment, it's the maintenance, it's the cleaning. There's a whole lot of different contracts that are set up. And there's now an asset class in Australia of tertiary accommodation investment. I'm sure you know that. So what are we looking at? We're looking at the student experience, and we're very much looking at the university teaching, learning, but the student experience is now so important. And it actually is a measurement on the quality and ranking of a university, looking at the student experience. So I really commend the University of Sydney for continuing on the path of looking at accommodation being fully owned by the university. I also commend the University of Sydney for putting a strategy for accommodation through to the Senate later this year. I was saying to Greg, this is happening at the University of Melbourne in parallel, that there's actually a current state research project and looking at an accommodation strategy through to 2040. It's partly driven by the federal government linking university housing and international student caps. However, whatever's triggered it, it's a jolly good idea. And I'm very, very pleased to know that Sydney and Melbourne universities are in parallel in this, because the accommodation experience is part of the student experience at a university and must be seen as part of their overall holistic time at the university.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I was quite shocked to hear that for a shared bedroom, you're paying $450 to $500 a week. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, but I mean, you're sharing the bedroom.
Yeah. Can I quickly ask, sorry, I'm attending remotely. Can I just quickly ask, is this price based on an operational, to make up for operational expenses, and or is it to pay for the actual accommodation because it was built at a certain price, hence it dictates from a feasibility study how much we should charge students? Just a curious question.
I don't really get it.
Yeah, we'll take further questions. If you'd type them into the chat, please, one at a time. But please proceed.
So look, in terms of how prices are set, I think it's fair to say a range of factors go into that. But certainly, I mean, the university is not here for profit. So we're not here to generate a commercial revenue for student accommodation. We're here, for, and actually our sort of governing instruments are very clear. We are here for education, student experience, and for research. And so how we set pricing on student accommodation is aligned with those core purposes and in fact must do so legally, right? So this is not a kind of commercial activity to generate revenue, but the range of things that go into that pricing includes, how much it costs to build and operate the building. As I said, we don't generally charge market rates. There's a discount on that, which is part of the model that we apply. But everything from the amount of space per student, which is driven by things like, is it single bedrooms, which most of our accommodation is there their own bathroom? Are you, do you have shared bathroom facilities, shared kitchens? All of that goes into the pricing, which is why there's such a differential rate. We do, for those that we own and operate, we do often have our own staff involved in that, which, partly those rates are set under things like our enterprise agreements. And then we sort of work through kind of building and maintenance costs to be as affordable as we possibly can be. So that's how we set price.
There's one question in the post. In residential halls at USyd, how many beds are dedicated to international students? Last time I checked in 2021 census, there were only about 500 beds in New South Wales. Can anybody comment on that?
So that those data points are not consistent with our experience here. So for the halls that I have been to, it's not all international students.
Yeah.
It tends to be about 50-50 actually.
Yeah.
And look, as you probably are aware, we have a range of accommodation options, including residential colleges, which have their own kind of model, an element of pastoral care, part of the university community, but owned and operated separately. Often you hear about those. For the accommodation that we own and operate, I think it's about 50-50, depends on the particular building, but certainly far more than 500.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Alan, yes.
I think a very important point is that most international students will still be dependent on the private rental sector. I mean, the vast majority. And this is a big problem because many of the students do not know their rights. They're very exploited by landlords. And I think what universities could do is really try and educate students, what their rights are, what their possibilities are. I mean, the regulation is not terribly strong, but nevertheless, they do have some rights. And I think a lot of students really suffer as a result of their, not really being aware. And maybe there could be a register of, good landlords, etc. Because, I mean, the notion that, most international students are going to be in university accommodation, I mean, that's a dream. I mean, UTS sold 428 units to Scape a couple of years ago, which is quite shocking. I think the other thing which is required is some type of crisis accommodation. I mean, what you have is students finding themselves homeless because they lose their job or whatever, or they, develop a gambling problem or whatever. And so I think universities should really have some crisis accommodation for students who find themselves facing homelessness. This is, as the survey indicated, this is a big issue.
Thanks, Alan.
So I would imagine that you probably do. At the University of Melbourne, we have crisis accommodation. In fact, International House keeps a couple of separate apartments for emergency accommodation from any student at the university who's needing exactly as you say. So I think it's probably would be policy across a number of universities, even just to have 2 apartments available for emergency means that they're there, even if they're there for a week, and then the students help. So I would think most universities would have a policy of trying to help. I'm just mentioning University of Melbourne. So
can I follow up on Weihong's challenge and ask, how would we go about this, Weihong? What is actually needed? Because it seems to be that it's too big a problem for the universities, and the government doesn't want to sort of get its hands dirty with this kind of question. So what's needed to actually implement some kind of progress on what seems like an enormous challenge? Because for decades, we watched the universities grow like topsy without paying attention to the question of where are the students going to sit. And then at some point later, the property prices caught up with this and created this terrible situation we're in at the moment. How does it move forward? Is this something that we need to get the state government behind? Is it something that the federal government should take a hand in? And of course, recognizing that those questions inevitably lead to huge delays and lots of political fighting about what should happen and how it should happen.
I always think about that for a long time, and probably one suggestion is we probably can keep a certain percentage of our tuition fee into a house levy and keep that every year and use that to build our own house at the university. Because it's really hard. I totally understand we all do research. So to get money for research for UC is really easy. Every time we send out to people to make decision, we put a huge bill to build the research facility and to high talent people. This can be approved. If we talk about to set up a room, not really fancy, probably not really be approved. But if we can set up a certain levy it's only for use to build the accommodation, then probably 3 or 4 years we have money and build a new building, then another building. probably a way. Another way is we could ask the government to say the university housing is a public house, part of the public housing. And if a certain percentage of local students live here, they're actually a public housing. I'm not sure if they have any concession on that.
Yeah, perhaps just to add a few sort of thoughts. I mean, in terms of what the government could do, and let me say, I think universities do see themselves as having a key responsibility and part of this solution and working actively on this. So, I mean, to give a sort of a data point on that. So the last introduction of new beds here at the University of Sydney was last year. We introduced 650 beds last year. We're working on another 135 this year. So I think I don't think there's a lack of interest or engagement or a sense of responsibility. I think it's the scale of the challenge and, you know, the time to kind of deliver. I think there's quite a significant gap. It would be very convenient to go to, you know, other providers which can deliver solutions, but I don't know that that necessarily gets to the student experience. If I was talking to government, you know, I do think one key thing that they could do is actually look at the settings for universities developing student accommodation to be more favourable and more akin to affordable housing rather than treating universities as commercial property developers, which is not what I think we are. I think that's a key government initiative that would have a real impact and that would improve our ability to be able to deliver quickly and at scale. Look, the other thing I just mentioned, you know, on behalf of the federal government, not that I necessarily endorse this policy, but I think the attempt that's being made in the federal government is, as they're looking at things like international student caps, there is a link with student accommodation. And so there's a concept, although we haven't seen it play out in detail yet, that says as you apply for international student places, there's an expectation around what student accommodation you provide alongside that. So I think there's an attempt to link the two. It hasn't really played out in detail around how that would work, what's included, what's not included, but I think there's an attempt there to link the two.
We've got a couple more questions on the chat. If you've got something quick to say.
May I please add something into the mix?
Yeah. Yes, please.
May I please add?
Yeah.
I think it's important to think laterally and strategically about how you can bring students together in communities if we're not necessarily able to fast track housing or residential halls for communities. And one of the ways that students can be brought together in communities is to have what I refer to as day colleges. If you walk around some of the top universities in the US of A, you find what I would refer to as union groups. There are actually buildings for different day students to actually meet. There's a hall with a stage and there's a cafe and so on. If you have day colleges through a university where perhaps 200 students are based at that day college, you might have a small library. You certainly will have study rooms. You'll have IT facilities. You'll have a cafe and restaurant. You'll have spaces for them to meet and study. So if you have day colleges through a university, you are providing a sense of connection and belonging to a group. And I think if you go back to ancient Greece group dynamics, a group of about 200 is one where human beings can know and be known. So I would throw into the mix the possibility of fast-tracking day colleges while the challenge of accommodation is being considered.
Thanks, Nicole. Ros, you've got a question.
Just to compete with the online people. First of all, thank you for such fantastic ideas that we've heard. It's been really, really helpful. I wanted to probably, starting maybe with the issue of bathrooms, I wanted to pick up on the word evidence. The students are also very interested in the cost of accommodation. And, you know, speaking as someone who's been very much in favour of the international house, I think a range of cost options are essential. And if people know that they choose a the cost implications of choosing an ensuite bathroom, they may well be very happy to go down the corridor as we did in the old days, very happily. So I think looking at the evidence of what students actually want and need would be really helpful in the accommodation sphere. And could I point out that the alumni, the International House alumni, put a huge amount of effort in the final years of the International House of specifying the characteristics of what we wanted in a future International House. I don't remember anyone raising bathrooms. I know there was a lot of unchallenged chat about people want en suites, but I don't remember they were absolutely adamant about the dining hall and places where people could meet and talk and gather. The other idea that we had, which is related to what Deborah is saying, was that if there were a 600-bed International House built with a program like the previous International House, a program of whatever you want to call it, relationship and intercultural development, it should also provide a hub. And I think this relates to your day college's idea. We weren't ignorant of the fact that 600 does not solve the university's accommodation problem for international students. But we talked about having a hub that would maybe enable people to get legal advice even about their private accommodation problems. There are models in Berkeley about student information that's available at the International House, and spaces for people in International House. It was going to be called associate members of the International House, so that there would still be some sense of belonging, and there'll be facilities and events that people not living at the house could attend. So I think it's actually very challenging, but also really reassuring to hear you talking about solutions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ros. I'd like to give a little bit of attention to a few things that are on the chat here. From Sally Chen. Dear Nicole, I completely agree with you. Traditional dormitory style design can offer more efficient use of space than apartment layouts. It's possible to strike a balance between privacy and shared facilities. Just now you did share some factual numbers, which I didn't hear clearly. Could you please share your study and research? How much is the financial difference? Thank you. That maybe needs an answer at length, or do you have a quick response?
No, so look, let me just say a couple of things. So the first thing I would say is, so we do conduct research and evidence on what students want. I think it's fair to say it's not a one size fits all. And so there are different needs. Some of those are cultural, I agree. We have seen that as well. But what we're trying to do is, as we think about additional accommodation, what do we currently have in the suite of offerings? Where is there the most demand and need moving forward? And how do we tailor what we do moving forward to those needs? So, but look, acknowledge it's not a one size fits all. In terms of price points, look, it does depend on, the quality of accommodation, the amount of floor space, whether or not it's offered through the university or through a commercial provider. The figures that I referenced were, I think our lowest rate accommodation option is just over $400. And as I look at the most expensive, or, one of the more expensive commercial providers here, it's $979 per week. So there's a very big range between, $420 to kind of $980, but different models. So that's from commercial to university operated, and look, acknowledging. So the lowest rate is a shared bedroom arrangement. So you have to look at all of those factors in comparing prices, but we certainly, look at all of those as we think about the needs of our students.
Thanks, Nicole. Another contribution from Artie. I am an IH alumnus, 1999. I'm also a practicing architect, and so surprised we are not considering repurposing the building. I take it he's referring to the IH building down the road, into the same asset class, considering the pressure on decarbonisation. In whatever format, surely it is a better outcome. I apologise if the tack has changed and refurbishment is now on the table. Well, to be honest, it's not, as far as I know, but why not? Why not is it not on the table?
So look, I've been waiting for the question and happy to take it. I think that the question everyone's wondering is, what are the plans for International House? And as you would all be aware, it has not been operating for many years due to some safety and significant challenges. What I can say is we are actively working on a solution and hoping to work through something that may well be, I think, a good solution. I'm not in a position to be able to share any announcements tonight, but there is a dedicated team working very closely on this, trying to work through what might be a viable solution. Given that kind of complex environment, we are having to think outside the box. And so it's not, necessarily, what might immediately come to mind, but please know this is a priority for us and we're working hard on it.
Thanks, Nicole. The final comment that's there is again from Sally Chen, and basically to summarize, it's on the point of room sharing. I believe design can make a huge difference. Thoughtful layouts, partitions, soundproofing, community areas can transform the experience into something supportive rather than stressful. But we heard previously from Deborah about some of the disadvantages of room sharing also. So actually, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. There should be a range of accommodation options. And I think importantly at the moment, it seems to me that actually, there needs to be a more vigorous discussion about how we can actually move things forward in a constructive way. And International House per se in Sydney University is just one small part of this problem, which is actually a very big problem. Are there any other questions that we'd like to take from the floor or from the online? What have we got here? Oh, Dennis, I have not heard about the desired for catered accommodation versus self-catering. What is the desire and what are the cost implications? Would anybody like to handle that one?
Do you want to start, Deborah?
That's a really interesting question because University of Melbourne is providing both self-catering and fully catering. And International House Melbourne for 4 years was actually in between the two because we introduced choice of meal packages with just all meals or just lunch and 5 dinners and then just lunch and dinner. We had 3 different meal packages and it was really popular. But managing it became an issue as far as who was eligible to have dinner that night and how did it all work. It was very popular, I'd have to say, with the different meal packages. But I think, it's black and white. Either you have self-catering or you have full meals provided. And if you're looking at full meals provided, you're looking at having a dining room, village square, as I say. But on the other hand, as referred, students who are self-catering have shared cooking facilities and they are interacting when they're self-catering. If there's provision for dining areas, if they're self-catering and there are areas they can sit together, then you're certainly serving a purpose of students becoming part of a community. So I think that, again, one size does not fit all. And you look at making sure that there is provision for community, whether there's full catering in dining room or there's self-catering in shared areas where people have dining facilities to sit and eat and talk.
And I would just add, we're the same. We have both. One of the things I really like about the catered option, yes, there's a sort of health nutrition element to it, but I also like the pastoral care of students coming together every day. If someone's missing for a period of time or not arriving for meals, people notice, I think there's a lot of strength to that model. It does have a cost attached to it. And so, again, not one size fits all. I think I also see benefits in the self-catered model. Yes, there's some kind of financial advantage points. There's also elements of independence, learning life skills, connecting with others. So I don't think there's one that's better than the other. We offer both. I think it does depend on the student and what they're seeking.
Yes. Well, Thanks for those perspectives. I guess I would add my own tuppence worth on the point about getting developing connections between the local students and the international students. That we do not want to bring in a big cohort of international students and keep them separate from the locals. The benefits of diversity and meeting a broad range of people, as Nicole described in her own experience, are just so enormous that actually it's something that we need to, we build that in from the start. And actually in the International House perspective, the normal approach has been, well, the dining hall actually looks after this to a large degree. So, you know, that's I guess part of my own experience, and I think that probably there are other perspectives. We need to allow for choice. We're not going to provide one solution for everybody. But in summing up, I think it's about time to close the proceedings, unless anybody's got any pressing questions at this point. Taz, yeah. So Taz first, yeah.
Thank you for the invigorating discussion. I had a question following from Greg's comment about bridging that gap between local students and international students, and linking that back to Weihong and Professor Alan Lauris's topics that reflected on how difficult it can be to socialize and to focus on intercultural exchange when there's a looming stress of security of your housing situation. So it seems that, yeah, continuing from Roz's comment on creating a hub or some sort of platform for international students and domestic students to interact without being residents at International House might be an option, but facilitating that by a method to reduce the housing stress seems like a hurdle that I have no ideas, but I was wondering if there are any ideas to the panel.
Yeah. Look, it's such a deep issue now. It's, you know, well, it's not only international students, of course, it's the Australian population, which is the bottom 20%. So I think the point I was trying to make from the survey is that clearly a proportion of the international students can afford to find their way in the private rental market, or university, can pay $979 a week. I mean, that's astonishing. But obviously that's really the top 20%, maybe, or even the top 15%. So, I mean, we're talking about that's like bottom 50% of international students. They will be dependent on the private rental market. So I think it's, in terms of duty of care, what the universities can do is try their best to try and strengthen the power of students in that market. A lot of them will be living in absolutely shocking accommodation. Their landlords will be treating, won't be maintaining the property, etc. So I think, I'm not sure about housing office in Sydney, University of Sydney, but I know that the Redfern Legal Centre, for example, has been overrun now with 10-year issues. They have a free service for international students. So I think this is the huge issue, trying to strengthen the capacity of international students in that market. I'm not sure how, but information would be very crucial, and also having the possibility of, approaching a legal person in the university.
We have one more question, then, please. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Cohen Dato. I'm an architect as well. I'll just add a data point to yours, which was that I was a master's student in London, and I had very unstable mental health. And I was, after about 2 months, I was no fixed address, and I completed my entire master's degree under no fixed address. I'm not sure how, but I think that's an experience that's underestimated as well. My question is that for the university's perspective or the perspective of International House and similar providers, in the absence of a pure free market mechanism, what are the different models for choosing who can access various types of non-commercial accommodation, whether it is pure first come, first serve, or whether there are forms of means testing or welfare testing or academic merit testing as well?
So look, I think as we develop our student accommodation strategy, part of what you have described as some of the things that we're thinking about, including, and Weihong mentioned this, I do think we have higher levels of responsibilities to first year students, particularly international students who are arriving. That first year when you land, you don't necessarily have friends that you can move in with. So I think that is a factor that is important as we think through prioritization. As students have been here beyond their first year, make connections, get to know the city. Not to say that, and look, there's definitely not a model that says, okay, after the first year, you're on your own. But I think it's an important element. I'm not kind of deep in the team around how the current prioritization works, so I couldn't answer that with authority other than to say, we do kind of try and prioritize a fair system, but I couldn't kind of speak about the actual detail on that. You might be able to, Deborah. Yeah.
It's a really interesting question, and I think the answer lies in providing a range of accommodation so students self-select. So at the University of Melbourne, the university-owned accommodation covers only graduate accommodation apartments. It covers undergraduate and graduate apartments, and it covers colleges, which are more the traditional college with the dining room and activities and tutorials and so on. And it is, if you like, first in, they get a place. Because why does it work? It works because students choose where they want to apply to, because there's a choice of different types of accommodation, all graduates, apartment style, college style. And so it is first in, and then they are placed. Wherever they apply to, they get a place. But it's because they self-select the type of accommodation they want. I must say that the colleges, the apartment style accommodation is usually filled up by around about November of the previous year. So there then becomes an issue of people knowing that they need to apply early. But it's a really interesting question. The only people who would not be accepted would be people for whom the accommodation cannot provide, whatever their needs might be. If the accommodation cannot provide for them, that would be an issue. So the university would only be providing accommodation for students for whom they can provide accommodation as appropriate.
Okay, one last question. If we'd like, from Sally Chen again, if we'd like to assist with the redevelopment project or simply keep in touch, who would be the best person or team to contact through the IH Council via SUIHAA? It would be great if you could kindly share the contact details here. And I think the answer to that is that SUIHAA is actually the natural organisation to actually handle the voluntary support. And we are, because Dennis is a member of the IH Council as the president of SUIHAA, the two organisations are in close contact anyway. With that, I'm conscious that we're a little bit over time. And in closing, I would like to again thank our guest speakers, Alan Morris, Deborah Seifert, Weihong Liang, and Nicole Gower. Really for some interesting discussions and, really new information and new ideas. Thank you so much for your active contributions to this. I would like to thank all of the live and online audience. And finally, I would like to thank the members of the SUIHAA committee charged with organising and producing today's event, especially Ros Madden, Dennis Schatz, Taz Rahman, Josh Lee, who has been looking after the electronics and making sure it all works here, and Margaret Limo. And with that, I close the proceedings, and thank you very much.
Good question.